Well, good afternoon. My name is Ralph Wilcox. I'm National Register and Survey Coordinator with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. Thank you for coming and welcome to the Sandwiching and History Tour of Ferncliff Camp and Conference Center. Thank goodness we have such a beautiful day out today with a nice breeze and a shady porch to sit on. We would like to thank the staff of Ferncliff for allowing us to tour the camp today. This tour is worth 1 hour of continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects. As I said, see me after the tour if you're interested in that. I also want to thank Nancy Wolford. I don't know if she is here today. She has written a pretty extensive history of Ferncliff, and it actually serves as the basis for this tour today. And I also want to thank Ann Owen, and I don't see Ann here today either. She's the one that nominated Ferncliff to us to be a tour location for this season. So we really appreciate Ann bringing Ferncliff to our attention. I am Presbyterian and I've come out here, but I never really knew a lot of the history until I read what Ann and Nancy had given to me. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll tell you about this area and Ferncliff. In the first part of the 20th century, there were many small scattered settlements out here in the western part of Pulaski County, including Doe Branch, White Oak, and Spring Valley. With the establishment of the Ferndale Post Office in 1914, the name came to encompass many of the communities in the area. However, even though the post office was known as Ferndale, the separate communities retained their identities and were still known by their original names. Although Ferndale had a post office, it was never incorporated as a town. The Ferndale community was reached from Little Rock by what was called the Mount Ida Road, later known as 12th Street, Pike, and in recent years, Canis Road. The Ferndale area was mainly populated by farming families, but the area also provided opportunities for the milling, mining, and timber industries. By the 1860s and 1870s, a water-powered mill was in operation on Maumelle Creek, and a grist mill and gin were built on Fletcher Creek as well. Various water mills and steam mills also operated in the area until 1926. Lead was also mined from the land in the area, and in 1933, a small gold mine was established north of 12th Street, Pike. Even as late as 1963, a trace of gold was panned from Hog Branch Creek 2 miles west of Ferndale Cutoff. Several sawmills took advantage of the large stands of timber in the countryside. In 1907, Maumelle Junction, a logging camp for Niemeyer's Mill out of Little Rock, was located near the railroad in Ferndale. However, by 1916, the logging industry had exhausted their resources here, and they moved to Saline County instead. In the early 20th century, the Ferndale area had also become a popular destination for people from Little Rock. Its scenic beauty, which you see today, attracted many to various camps and retreats that dotted the area. For example, Camp Okatoma was established by Dr. Lamb and Oscar Gray on Walnut Grove Road near Fletcher Creek. Arkansas Power and Light employees constructed a camp on Little Maumelle Creek west of Denny Road and Ferndale Cutoff, and Camp Joseph Pfeiffer was built in 1929. Fred High School, managing editor of the Arkansas Gazette from 1902 until 1931, had a summer house called Whisperwood, constructed in 1925 on several acres in the shadow of Bullard Mountain. This influx of city folk was not without its drawback for residents. The Pulaskian of July 1915 stated that Little Rock people had discovered the area and had taken possession. The reporter admonished city people for acting rude and vulgar in the country. In the face of this invasion, some establishments were considered the territory of locals. Prothero's Campground and the boarding house known as Wooten Villa, now the Sam Jones House just west of the intersection of Ferndale Cutoff and Canis, were the scenes of numerous tacky parties, picnics, and religious revivals for the residents and railroad workers. Prothero's Campground was located on the Little Maumelle Creek, less than 1 mile south of Highway 10 on Ferndale Cutoff. The campground hosted summer camp meetings that lasted 1 to 3 weeks in duration. The Pleasant Grove Baptist Church moved to the site in 1880, and the Mary Williams Lodge, moved to the lot in 1905, served as shelter during rainy days, but most families slept in the open air or in small wooden cottages. By 1928, The campground fell out of use, and the lodge was moved again to Danny Road and Ferndale Cutoff. By the 1930s, nothing remained of the church. However, one of the most successful of the camps was Ferncliff Camp, which was established in the 1920s by Dr. Shipp for those wishing to get away from the city. In the foothills of the Ozarks, just 12 miles west of Little Rock, and nestled on the shores of Lake Ferncliff and watched over by 4 mountains, which were appropriately named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, lies Ferncliff Camp and Conference Center. The third largest campground in the Presbyterian Church, with approximately 1,200 acres, Ferncliff has provided camping and conference facilities for the Presbyterian Church and others for the last 70 years. Just a brief note on the beginnings of Presbyterianism in Arkansas. Presbyterianism had its beginnings in the state in 1827 when Pennsylvania native James Wilson Moore was ordained as a missionary for the Arkansas Territory. He arrived in Little Rock on January 25, 1828, and quickly preached his first sermon, held a prayer meeting, and formed a Sunday school. On July 27, 1828, Moore organized the first Presbyterian Church of Little Rock, which was a mission church of the Presbytery of Mississippi and South Alabama. On April 16, 1835, the Presbytery of Arkansas was organized, and in 1846, Moore attended the General Assembly in Philadelphia, giving the Presbytery of Arkansas its first voice in the National Governing Board of the Church. Throughout the rest of the 19th century, the Presbyterian Church continued to grow throughout the state. The beginnings of Ferncliff occurred in 1921 when Dr. A.C. Shipp and Mr. E.D. Weissert, the federal game warden for Arkansas, sought a summer place for their families. Weissert negotiated the purchase of 90 acres near Ferndale from the Niemeyer Lumber Company. After the construction of a log dam on the creek, clearing, and the construction of a bathhouse, tennis courts, and a few cottages, the summer of 1924 witnessed the residency of several prominent Little Rock families. Since the families who used the camp lived in Little Rock, a caretaker, Mr. A.J. Holland, was employed to look after the premises. Mr. Holland and his wife lived on or near the Ferncliff premises and worked at the camp for more than 20 years. As the years passed, additional cottages were built for other families, and bottled water produced by the springs at Ferncliff was sold to Little Rock residents. A large white frame house was erected on the west side of the lake, which would be over there where the Williams Lodge now stands, and families from the city could rent the house for various periods. During the summer of 1932, Bill and Helen Williams, who were Presbyterians, occupied the White House, and the Williamses conceived the idea of acquiring the Ferncliff property for use as a camp and meeting place for Presbyterians. During the first part of the 20th century, the Presbyterians had no camp or conference center to call their own, and they had to rent whatever limited facilities were available elsewhere. Although the idea of turning Ferncliff into a Presbyterian camp and retreat center had its origins in the early 1930s, it took a while to make the dream a reality. And in 1937, Ferncliff Incorporated was organized. Dr. Shipp sold the property to the corporation for $35,000, with no money down, a low rate of interest, and the note to be paid out of the proceeds from operations. Initial incorporators of Ferncliff were Little Rock businessmen William H. Williams, Marion L. Christ, G. L. Alexander, Granger Williams, and Charles Harley. Soon thereafter, others were added to the board of directors, including Brooks Bradley, Robert S. Lindsay, and C. W. Pittenger. The size and scope of Ferncliff grew quickly during the 1930s and 1940s. The initial 90 acres of the camp became 360 acres through property acquired by Mr. and Mrs. Bill Williams during the 1940s. The county road was relocated, and additional camp facilities were gradually built. A $100,000 bond at the conclusion of World War II provided funds for the present dam, a new dining hall, new cottages, and on-site water and sewer improvements. Hugh B. Patterson and his wife, Martha Wilson Patterson, came to Ferncliff in March of 1938 to serve as resident managers, and they remained the camp's resident managers for more than 20 years. The present dam at Ferncliff was erected in memory of Mr. Hugh B. Patterson, affectionately known by everyone as Uncle Hugh. It is fondly remembered that Uncle Hugh held the place together with baling wire and prayer, caulked the dam with buckets of concrete when it would leak, patched the electrical system to where the patches were strained, and lived in one of the wretched old cottages until a home could be built for them. Mr. Patterson conceived the idea of using the area's neighboring families for his maintenance and kitchen crew. Patterson would counsel the families, visit with the families, and he made a place in their hearts for himself and his wife. Patterson's efforts with the local families ended up being a real contribution to the life of Ferncliff and one of the key components of its success. Also during the early years of Ferncliff in the 1930s, having a small chapel at the camp became the dream of Robert Wilson Ramsey, known as Bob to his friends. Ramsey had come to Ferncliff from his home church of First Presbyterian in Jonesboro for many summers as a young student to attend youth conferences. Ramsey showed unusual maturity and a keen interest in the development of Ferncliff. In the fall of 1936, he left Arkansas to enter Davidson College, but each summer during those college years, he returned to Arkansas and worked to get support for the building of the chapel at Ferncliff. He graduated from Davidson in 1940, and by that summer, he saw his dream fulfilled with the construction of a small, open-air fieldstone chapel. The chapel is located over on the other side of the lake, behind the 3 cottages that you see over there. In August of 1940, Bob left Arkansas again, this time to enter Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, but soon became ill and was diagnosed as having polio, a crippling disease for which there was not a vaccine at that time. Bob died on September 20th, 1940, and a short time later the chapel at Ferncliff was named in his memory. When William H. Williams died in 1950, Marion L. Christ became the president of Ferncliff and continued the fine work that had been completed here in the 1930s and 1940s. As work from the bond funds was completed and operations became more predictable, it was decided by the board of directors that Ferncliff should be deeded to the Synod of Arkansas to be used as the Presbyterian Conference Center. This gift was made subject to the then outstanding bonded debt of some $65,000. After the Synod assumed ownership and responsibility for Ferncliff, it was operated under the direction of the then Christian Education Committee of the Synod and the Associate Regional Director of Christian Education. The size of Ferncliff land holdings grew tremendously in 1963 when the executors of the William H. Williams estate allowed nearly 1,232 acres of land surrounding Ferncliff, which was protecting its watershed, to be offered to the Synod. The sale of the lands of the Synod was completed in 1966 at $30 an acre, or $36,930. After the completion of the sale, the total acreage of Ferncliff stood at just under 1,600 acres. For those of you who are not familiar with the organization of the Presbyterian Church, the individual congregations are grouped into larger bodies called presbyteries, which are then grouped into larger bodies called synods. Arkansas is divided into two presbyteries, the Presbytery of the Pines, which covers southern Arkansas and northern Louisiana, and the Presbytery of Arkansas, which covers the rest of the state, including Pulaski County. The offices for the Presbytery of Arkansas are over on Rodney Parham Road, right next to Grace Presbyterian Church, right at the base of Reservoir Road. The Presbytery of Arkansas is part of the Synod of the Sun, which comprises Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. It was also during the 1960s that the management of the facilities at Ferncliff was shifted to various agencies of the Synod. The organization of the Synod was revised a couple of times, as was the organization of the Presbytery, and Ferncliff ultimately became the responsibility of the Presbytery of Arkansas. By the 1960s, the condition of Ferncliff's facilities was deteriorating badly due to the fact that the camp's operations didn't generate enough funds to provide for maintenance and repairs. In fact, Ferncliff had to close for about 2 years during this time since the sewer system was collapsing, and the camp didn't reopen until repairs could be made. The Presbytery worked on a plan to salvage the facilities, and after a long and sometimes bitter struggle, the Presbytery voted in April of 1976 to transfer title of Ferncliff to the Arkansas-Oklahoma Presbyterian Foundation, which remains its present owner today. The foundation was given power to salvage, maintain, and operate the facilities as best it could, as well as decide upon the best way to pay the outstanding debt of approximately $200,000, which had accumulated over the years. To accomplish the payment of the debt, the foundation concluded it would be best to accept an offer from the Arkansas 4-H Foundation to purchase 213 acres of the site known as Echo Valley, immediately to the south of the camp and conference center. Also, in 1980, at the urging of the Reverend J. Allen Smith and others, Arkansas Presbyterian Union appointed a task force to make a long-range study to gather information on how best to improve and operate Ferncliff for Presbyterian use. Members of the task force included Reverend Smith, Lucy Abraham, June Williams, E. Granger Williams, and Torpy Skinner of Little Rock. James W. Mosley and Rhodes Stipp of Hot Springs. Florida report was completed in December of 1983 and presented to the Presbytery and the Foundation in 1984 when the concept was approved. As a result of this action, the Foundation leased under a long-term lease all of the Ferncliff property to a newly organized Board of Trustees of Ferncliff, which was an agency of the Presbytery, which first met for organizational purposes in April of 1985. Also, Fred and Yvonne Babb came to Ferncliff as resident managers in July 1987, and things began to move with the camp under their leadership until 1996. Funds from a Presbytery Capital Funds campaign enabled the board to make some much-needed improvements between 1986 and 1988, and in 1989, Ferncliff was the recipient of a major gift from the estate of William Clark Brown, Jr. of Hot Springs, that included $650,000 plus interest for a capital improvement fund and $330 plus interest for an endowment fund. It was with these capital funds that the board constructed the Brown Conference Center, which is the building over here to my right, that has 24 hotel-style rooms and meeting space, and they also modernized the Williams Memorial Lodge, which is directly across the lake. A swimming pool was also installed for the enjoyment of the campers. Ferncliff continued to grow during the 1990s as well. Working from the long-range plan initially established by the task force in the early 1980s, a capital funds campaign was begun in 1999 for a new youth camp on the east side of Ferncliff Road, which is over on the opposite side of the road. The campaign raised $2.5 million, due in part to a generous gift from Ted and Leslie Belden of Fayetteville. The Beldens had purchased 32 prime acres, known as Fern Creek, adjoining the Ferncliff property to the north, just off Canis Road, and agreed to donate the land and building to the foundation, with the agreement that the foundation would sell less strategic acres comparable in value, and the money would be used for the proposed youth camp. Thus, 128 acres on the south side of the 4-H Center was sold for $760,000, which was part of the $2.5 million of funds raised. Pivotal to the plan for the new youth camp was the completion of a tunnel under the road, giving safe access to both sides of the road within the Ferncliff property. In a collaborative partnership with Pulaski County, the road was straightened and the tunnel was constructed. Over the next 5 years, major improvements were made here at Ferncliff. A new welcome center, an activity building, and a maintenance building were constructed. 4 new duplex cabins with 88 beds were completed, and the new youth camp was dedicated in 2005. The Ferncliff Board used River Run Properties in 2011 to assist with a long-range strategic plan. The planning effort engaged a committee made up of board, staff, campers, counselors, and parents, and a year-long process of retreats. The plan was accepted by the board in February of 2012, and another capital campaign of $3.5 million was launched in July of 2012. The campaign called for building an eco center, a new swimming pool, additional lodging for the Brown Center, a new dining hall, which is the building right here, and 2 more youth cabins, along with infrastructure improvements. With challenge grants from the Walton Family Foundation of $1 million and the J.E.L.E. Mabee Foundation of $650,000, plus a $1 million pledge from the Presbytery of Arkansas, Ferncliff was able to reach the $3.5 million goal by the end of 2013. The first building, the Eco Center, which I believe is down that way to my left, was the most ambitious and the greenest undertaking by staff and volunteers. It is one of the largest buildings in the United States that is built with straw bale walls. Ferncliff was able to attract a national straw bale building workshop to kick off the construction. The 5,600 square foot building required 1,200 bales of straw, used radiant floor heating, is solar powered with a net metering system, and has many other green alternative technologies. It can house 22 people and has meeting space for up to 100. Over the last 20 years, as many Presbyterian camps and conference centers have been shutting down due to lack of money to keep them going, Ferncliff, however, has experienced slow but steady growth. It has survived by looking forward, not looking back. Although campers at Ferncliff still enjoy the traditional camp fun, such as hiking, fishing, canoeing, and campfires at night, other camping and conference opportunities have dealt with other topics that have become increasingly relevant in today's world, such as camps for children of incarcerated parents and camps for children of homeless families. Ferncliff has grown and evolved to become a camp of mission. Today, while you are here, feel free to explore the camp, its facilities, and its trails that include the camp's 4 mountains named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Thank you again for coming. Thank you again. Have a great weekend, and feel free to explore the beautiful surroundings here at Ferncliff.